The church bells tolled like a warning, each chime slicing through the humid Georgia air. Eli Carter, 27, stood frozen at the altar, his heart pounding so hard he thought it might crack his ribs. He wasn't ready for this, not for the eyes of the congregation, not for the weight of his father's shadow looming just beyond the pews. Eli had always known he was different. Growing up in the small town of Willow Creek, where every street corner had a cross and every Sunday was a sermon, he'd learned early to hide the truth. He'd buried his feelings under years of football practice, church youth groups, and his father's unrelenting expectations. John Carter, a deacon at Willow Creek Baptist, was a man of iron, his faith unyielding, his rules absolute. To him, Eli was the son who'd carry the family name, the one who'd marry a nice girl, settle down, and live the life John had mapped out. But Eli had never wanted that life. He wanted James. James Parker, 28, stood beside him now, his hand brushing Eli's in a quiet promise. His dark eyes held a steadiness that anchored Eli through the storm of nerves. They'd met 5 years ago at a community college in Atlanta, two lost souls finding each other in a city that felt like freedom. James, with his quick wit and unshakable courage, had shown Eli what it meant to live without shame. But coming back to Willow Creek for this wedding, their wedding was like walking into a lion's den. The church was packed, a sea of familiar faces. Some smiled, others whispered. Eli's mother, Clara, sat in the front row, her hands clasped tightly, her eyes glistening with something between pride and fear. John sat beside her, his face a mask of stone. Eli hadn't spoken to his father in months, not since the night John had found out about James and tried to fix him. It had been a year ago, in the dim light of the Carter family kitchen. Eli, home for Thanksgiving, had finally mustered the courage to tell his parents the truth. "I'm gay," he'd said, his voice trembling but firm. "And I'm in love with James." Clara had gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. John hadn't spoken at first. He'd just stared, his eyes narrowing as if Eli had confessed to a crime. Then came the words that still burned in Eli's memory. "You're broken, son. But we can fix this. We'll get you help." The help was a conversion therapy program, a place John had found through a pastor friend. Eli had refused, his voice rising in a way it never had before. "I'm not broken," he'd shouted. "This is who I am." The argument had spiraled, words like knives, until Eli stormed out, vowing never to return. But love has a way of pulling you back. And when James proposed 6 months later, Eli knew they had to face Willow Creek together. Now, standing at the altar, Eli felt the weight of every choice that had led him here. The pastor, a progressive friend from Atlanta, began the ceremony, his voice warm and steady. But Eli's eyes kept darting to his father. Would John stand up? Would he walk out? Or worse, would he say something to shatter this fragile moment? As the vows began, James squeezed Eli's hand, grounding him. "Eli," James said, his voice clear and unwavering, "I promise to love you through every storm, to stand by you when the world feels too heavy. You are my home." The words hit Eli like a wave, washing away the fear. He looked at James, his anchor, and felt the truth of their love settle deep in his bones. But the real test was coming. John Carter had asked to speak at the reception, a request that had sent Eli's stomach into knots. Clara had insisted it would be fine, that John just wanted to be part of the day. But Eli knew his father. He knew the fire in his voice, the conviction in his heart. Whatever John had to say, it would either heal them or break them forever. The ceremony ended with a kiss, soft and certain, as the congregation erupted in applause, some hesitant, some heartfelt. Eli and James walked down the aisle, hand in hand, into a future they'd fought for. But as they stepped into the warm September light, Eli couldn't shake the feeling that the hardest moment was still ahead. At the reception, held in a barn strung with fairy lights, the air buzzed with laughter and music. Friends from Atlanta mingled with Willow Creek locals, a delicate dance of worlds colliding. Eli tried to focus on the joy James's smile, the clink of glasses, the warmth of his mother's hug. But his eyes kept finding John, sitting at a table with a glass of untouched whiskey, his expression unreadable. As the speeches began, Eli's heart raced. Clara went first, her voice trembling but full of love. "I've learned so much from my son," she said, tears spilling over. "He's taught me what it means to be brave." The crowd clapped, and Eli felt a lump in his throat. Then the MC called John's name. John stood, his broad shoulders filling the room with a presence that demanded attention. He walked to the microphone, his steps deliberate, his face still a mask. Eli gripped James's hand under the table, bracing for impact. The barn fell silent, every eye on the man who'd once tried to fix his son. John cleared his throat, and when he spoke, his voice was steady but heavy with something Eli couldn't place. "I've made mistakes," he began, and the room seemed to hold its breath. "I thought I knew what was right for my son. I thought I could guide him." He paused, his eyes finding Eli's. "But I was wrong." Eli's breath caught. Was this real? Was his father, the man who'd spent a lifetime preaching certainty, admitting he was wrong? The words that followed would change everything, not just for Eli and James, but for every soul in that barn, watching a father and son find their way back to each other. John's voice echoed in the barn, each word landing like a stone in still water. "I thought I knew what was right," he repeated, his gaze locked on Eli. "I thought being a father meant protecting you from the world, from yourself. But I see now that I was the one who needed fixing." Eli felt James's hand tighten around his, a lifeline in the storm of emotions. The room was so quiet he could hear the faint hum of the fairy lights above. John Carter, the man who'd built his life on unwavering conviction, was unraveling in front of 100 people. Eli wanted to believe this was real, but doubt gnawed at him. He'd seen his father's anger, his stubborn refusal to bend. Was this a trick? A public show to save face? John continued, his voice softer now, almost breaking. "When Eli told us he was gay, I didn't listen. I didn't see him. I saw my own fears, my own failures. I thought I could change him." He shook his head, a bitter smile tugging at his lips. "I sent him to that place, that program, thinking it would make him whole. But it broke something between us instead." Eli's chest tightened at the memory. The program had been a cold, sterile facility outside Atlanta, a place that promised to heal through shame and scripture. Eli had gone once, at his mother's tearful urging, but walked out after an hour, his resolve hardening. He'd called James that night, sobbing in a gas station parking lot, vowing never to let anyone make him feel broken again. Now, John's eyes glistened, and Eli realized with a jolt that his father was holding back tears. "I read the Bible cover to cover," John said, searching for answers. "I thought God was telling me to fix my son. But then I read about love, real love, the kind that doesn't judge, doesn't condemn, and I realized I'd been reading it wrong my whole life." The crowd stirred, some nodding, others whispering. Clara reached for John's hand, her face a mix of pride and pain. Eli felt a tear slip down his cheek, but he didn't wipe it away. He wanted to feel this moment, raw and unfiltered. "I'm not here to ask for forgiveness," John said, his voice steadying. "I don't deserve it yet, but I'm here to say I see you. Eli, I see you in James, and I see love, real love, And I'm proud of you." The last words came out choked, and John lowered his head, stepping away from the microphone. The barn erupted in applause. Some hesitant, some thunderous. Eli's vision blurred as he stood, his chair scraping against the wooden floor. He crossed the room in a daze, James at his side, and stopped in front of his father. For a moment, they just stood there, two men who'd spent years building walls between them. Then Eli reached out, and John pulled him into a hug, the first in years that didn't feel like a transaction. "I'm sorry, son," John whispered, his voice muffled against Eli's shoulder. "I'm so sorry." Eli couldn't speak. He just held on, feeling the weight of a decade lift, if only a little. When they pulled back, John looked at James, extending a hand. "Your family now?" he said simply. James shook his hand, his eyes shining with unshed tears. The rest of the reception passed in a blur of toasts and laughter. But Eli felt like he was floating. He and James danced under the fairy lights, their bodies swaying to a slow country song. For the first time in years, Eli felt like he could breathe in Willow Creek. But the peace was fragile. The next morning, as Eli and James packed to leave for their honeymoon, a knock came at their hotel room door. It was Clara, her face pale. "Your father's gone to see Pastor Reynolds," she said, her voice tight. "He's trying to get the church to hold a meeting about what happened last night." Eli's stomach dropped. Pastor Reynolds was the old guard, a man who'd preached fire and brimstone for 30 years. If John was meeting with him, it could mean trouble. Had his father's speech been a moment of weakness, not strength? Was he already backtracking? James grabbed Eli's hand, his voice calm but firm. "Whatever happens, we face it together." "Okay." Eli nodded, but fear crept back in. They'd won a battle last night, but the war for acceptance in Willow Creek was far from over. Determined to confront the issue head-on, Eli and James drove to the church. The parking lot was crowded, a sign of an impromptu gathering. Inside, Pastor Reynolds stood at the pulpit, his face grim, while John sat in the front pew, his expression unreadable. The congregation buzzed with tension, some faces friendly, others hostile. "Eli, James," Pastor Reynolds said, his voice cold. "This church has always stood for tradition. Your union challenges that. We need to discuss what this means for our community." Eli felt his heart race, but James stepped forward, his voice steady. "With all due respect, Pastor, this isn't about your community. It's about love. And if your tradition can't make room for that, maybe it's the tradition that needs to change." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Eli saw his father shift in his seat, his hands clenched. Would John stand with them? Or would he fall back into the comfort of old beliefs? The answer would shape not just their future, but the soul of Willow Creek itself. The church smelled of polished wood and old hymnals. But to Eli, it felt like a battlefield. Pastor Reynolds' words hung in the air, sharp and heavy, as the congregation waited for someone to break the silence. Eli's pulse thundered in his ears, his eyes darting between James's defiant stance and his father's tense posture in the front pew. John stood slowly, his broad frame casting a shadow across the aisle. Every head turned, the weight of his presence undeniable. Eli braced himself, expecting the worst, another lecture, another rejection. But when John spoke, his voice was low, deliberate, and carried a quiet fire. "Pastor, I've followed you for 20 years. I've trusted your guidance, your sermons, but I've been wrong before, and I'm starting to think we've all been wrong about some things." A gasp rippled through the pews. Pastor Reynolds' face tightened, his hands gripping the pulpit. "John, this is about God's word, not personal feelings. The Bible is clear. Is it? John interrupted, his voice rising. I've read it, Pastor, over and over. And what I keep coming back to is love. Jesus didn't turn away the outcasts. He didn't shame them. He loved them. He turned to face the congregation, his eyes scanning the crowd. My son isn't a sin. His love for James isn't a sin. And if we can't see that, then maybe we're the ones who need to repent. Eli's breath caught. He'd never heard his father speak like this, with such raw conviction. James squeezed his hand, a silent reminder that they weren't alone. But Pastor Reynolds wasn't backing down. John, you're letting emotion cloud your judgment. This church has stood for tradition, for family values. Family values. Clara's voice cut through, sharp and unexpected. She stood, her small frame trembling with anger. My son is my family. James is my family. And if this church can't accept them, then it's not a place I can call home anymore. The room erupted in whispers, some shocked, some supportive. Eli felt a surge of pride for his mother, who'd always been the quiet strength behind their family. John reached for her hand, and for the first time, Eli saw them as a united front, not just for him, but for what was right. But the congregation was divided. An older man, Mr. Hargrove, stood up, his face red. This is a house of God, not a place for this. He gestured vaguely at Eli and James, his voice dripping with disdain. A few others nodded, their murmurs growing louder. Eli's heart sank. This was the Willow Creek he'd feared, the one that clung to judgment over compassion. Then a younger voice piped up. Sarah, a 20-year-old who'd grown up with Eli in youth group, stood. I don't understand everything about this, she said, her voice shaky but clear. But I know Eli. He's kind. He's honest. And he loves James. If God made him this way, who are we to say it's wrong? Her words sparked a ripple of agreement from others' friends, neighbors, even a few older members who'd stayed silent until now. Pastor Reynolds raised a hand, trying to regain control. This isn't a debate. We're here to uphold our values. No, John said, stepping forward. We're here to decide what kind of church we want to be. One that shuts people out, or one that opens its doors. He looked at Eli, his eyes soft but resolute. I choose my son. I choose love. The room fell silent again, the weight of John's words settling over everyone. Pastor Reynolds hesitated, his authority shaken. Finally, he said, we'll take this to a vote. The congregation will decide if this marriage can be recognized here. Eli's stomach twisted. A vote. Their love, their lives, reduced to a show of hands. James leaned in, whispering, whatever happens, we're enough. But Eli couldn't shake the fear. This wasn't just about the chalk hit, was about whether Willow Creek could ever be home again. The vote was scheduled for the following Sunday, giving the town a week to simmer in debate. Eli and James returned to Atlanta, their honeymoon plans on hold. The city felt like a refuge. But even there, the tension followed. Eli couldn't stop checking his phone, dreading updates from his mother. James tried to keep things light, cooking dinners and planning quiet nights in. But Eli could see the worry in his eyes. One evening, as they sat on their balcony overlooking the Atlanta skyline, Eli broke the silence. What if they vote against us? What if my dad changes his mind again? His voice cracked, the vulnerability spilling out. James turned to him, his expression fierce. Then we keep going. We build our life, our family, no matter what they say. But Eli, your dad, I saw his face last night. He's not going back. Eli wanted to believe him, but doubt lingered. The next day, Clara called with news. The town's talking. she said. Some folks are angry, but others are coming around. Sarah's been organizing, talking to people, sharing your story. And your father, he's been meeting with families, trying to change minds. Eli was stunned. His father, the man who'd once called him broken, was fighting for him. It felt too good to be true. But as the week wore on, more updates came, neighbors dropping by with casseroles, old friends sending messages of support. Even Mr. Hargrove, the gruff traditionalist, had softened, admitting he'd misjudged Eli. By the time Sunday arrived, Eli and James were back in Willow Creek, standing outside the church as the congregation filed in. Eli's heart pounded, but James's hand in his was a steady anchor. Whatever happened inside, they'd face it together. As the doors closed and the vote began, Eli closed his eyes, praying not for acceptance, but for the strength to keep going, no matter the outcome. The church doors creaked shut, sealing Eli and James outside with their racing thoughts. Inside, the congregation's murmurs buzzed like a hive, each voice a thread in the tapestry of Willow Creek's future. Eli leaned against James, the cool autumn air doing little to calm the fire in his chest. They'd chosen to wait outside during the vote, not wanting their presence to sway or provoke. But the distance only heightened Eli's anxiety. He pictured Pastor Reynolds at the pulpit, his stern face framing words of judgment. He imagined his father, torn between newfound courage and decades of ingrained belief. What if John faltered under pressure? What if the town's old wounds reopened, deeper than before? James, sensing Eli's spiral, pulled him close. "Hey," he said softly, his breath warm against Eli's ear. "We've already won. We're here. Together. That's what matters." Eli nodded, but the words felt distant, drowned by the fear of rejection from the only home he'd ever known. Minutes stretched into eternity. Then the doors opened, and Clara emerged, her face unreadable. Eli's heart stopped as she approached, her eyes red but bright. "It's done," she said, her voice trembling. "They voted 60% in favor of recognizing your marriage." Eli blinked, the words not fully registering. "In favor?" he whispered. James let out a shaky laugh, pulling Eli into a hug. "We did it," James said, his voice thick with relief. But Eli's eyes were on his mother, searching for the catch. "Dad?" he asked. Clara smiled, a tear slipping down her cheek. "He spoke for you, Eli. He stood up there and told them what you mean to him. To us." She reached for his hand. "Come inside. They want to see you." The church was quieter now, the tension replaced by a fragile hope. As Eli and James stepped inside, heads turned, some with smiles, others with cautious nods. Pastor Reynolds stood at the pulpit, his expression softer but still guarded. "Eli, James," he said, his voice formal. "The congregation has spoken. Your union is recognized here, as an act of love under God's grace." Eli felt a weight lift, but it wasn't complete. He scanned the room for his father. John stood near the front, his shoulders slumped as if the fight had drained him. When their eyes met, John gave a small nod, a gesture that spoke volumes. Eli crossed the room, James at his side, and stopped in front of his father. "Thank you," Eli said, his voice barely above a whisper. John's eyes glistened, and he pulled Eli into another hug, this one fiercer than before. "I meant every word," John said. "I'm not done learning, but I'm trying. Son." The congregation began to disperse, some approaching to offer congratulations, others slipping out quietly. Sarah, the young woman who'd spoken up before, hugged Eli tightly. "I'm proud of you," she said, This town's changing because of you. Eli smiled, but the weight of her words settled heavily. Change was hard won, and not everyone was on board. As they left the church, Eli noticed Mr. Hargrove lingering by the door. The older man hesitated, then approached. "I voted against you," he admitted, his voice gruff. "But I see your father's heart. I'll think on it." It wasn't acceptance, but it was a start, and Eli took it as a small victory. Back in Atlanta, life resumed with a new rhythm. Eli and James finally went on their honeymoon. A quiet week in Savannah filled with walks along cobblestone streets and late-night talks about their future. But Willow Creek lingered in Eli's mind. The vote had been a milestone, but it hadn't erased the town's divisions or his own doubts about fitting in. One evening, as they sat by the Savannah River, James turned to Eli. "You're still carrying it, aren't you? The town, your dad, all of it." Eli sighed, staring at the water's reflection. "I just keep wondering if it's enough. If they'll ever really accept us." James took his hand, his voice steady. "They're trying. Your dad's trying. And even if they don't get there, we have each other. That's our home." Eli leaned into him, letting the words sink in. James was right. They'd built something stronger than Willow Creek's approval. But the story wasn't over. A week after their return, Clara called with news that shook Eli's fragile peace. "Pastor Reynolds is stepping down," she said. "He says the vote split the church too deeply. Some folks are pushing for a new pastor, someone more traditional." Eli's heart sank. Had their victory been too costly? Had they pushed the town too far? Too fast? Determined to understand, Eli and James returned to Willow Creek. The church was in disarray, with factions forming, some wanting to move forward, others clinging to the past. John was at the center, trying to mediate, but the strain was clear in his tired eyes. "I didn't expect this," he admitted to Eli. "I thought I could hold it together." Eli felt a surge of guilt. Had his wedding, his fight for love, fractured the community. But James, ever the voice of reason, spoke up. "This isn't your fault, Eli. Or yours, John. Change hurts, but it's necessary." John nodded, but his face was heavy with doubt. As they left the meeting, Eli saw Sarah organizing a group of younger members, planning a community event to bridge the divide. "We're not giving up," she told Eli, her eyes fierce. "This town can be better." Her determination sparked something in Eli, a resolve to keep fighting, not just for himself, but for everyone who'd ever felt out of place in Willow Creek. Willow Creek was a town caught in its own tug of war, the air thick with whispers and unspoken grudges. Eli and James walked its streets, feeling the weight of every glance, some warm, some wary. The church's vote had cracked open old wounds, and Pastor Reynolds' resignation had poured salt into them. Eli couldn't shake the guilt. Had their wedding been the spark that set the town ablaze? He and James had returned to help, staying at Clara's house, where the kitchen table became a war room for late-night talks. John was there too, his face lined with exhaustion but resolute. "I didn't think it'd come to this," he said one evening, nursing a coffee. "But I'm not backing down. This town needs to face itself." Clara nodded, her hands busy knitting, a habit that calmed her nerves. "Some folks are scared," she said. "They've never questioned the way things were. But others, they're listening." Sarah's group is growing. Sarah had become a quiet force, rallying younger members to push for a more inclusive church. Her community event, a picnic meant to unite the town, was set for the weekend. Eli admired her courage but felt the pressure mounting. "What if it's not enough?" he asked, his voice low. "What if we're just tearing everything apart?" James, sitting beside him, reached for his hand. Change doesn't come without mess, he said. But we're not the ones breaking things. We're just asking to be seen. The picnic arrived under a crisp October sky. The town park dotted with blankets and tables laden with food. Sarah had worked tirelessly, convincing even skeptics like Mr. Hargrove to attend. Eli and James helped set up, their presence drawing curious looks. Some greeted them warmly. Others kept their distance. But the turnout was bigger than anyone expected. Sarah took the makeshift stage, a flatbed trailer decorated with flowers, and spoke with a clarity that belied her 20 years. This town's always been about community, she said. But community doesn't mean sameness. It means loving each other, even when we're different. Her words landed softly, but Eli saw heads nodding, even among the older crowd. Then Mr. Hargrove stood, his gruff voice cutting through the chatter. I've been wrong before, he said, glancing at Eli and James. I thought tradition was everything. But I see now, it's not about rules. It's about people. He sat down abruptly, as if embarrassed by his own honesty. But the crowd clapped, a tentative bridge forming. Eli felt a flicker of hope, but it was short-lived. That evening, a group of traditionalists, led by a deacon named Carl, announced plans to form a new church, one that upheld true values. The news hit like a punch, and John took it hardest. I thought we could keep everyone together, he told Eli, his voice heavy. But maybe some folks aren't ready. Eli's heart ached for his father, who'd risked so much to stand by him. You did more than I ever expected, Eli said. You're still my dad. John's eyes softened, and for a moment, the weight of the past seemed lighter. Determined to keep the momentum, Eli and James joined Sarah's efforts. They met with families, shared their story, and listened to fears and hopes. One night, a shy teenager named Mia approached them, her voice barely audible. I'm like you, she said, glancing at the ground. I've been scared to tell anyone. But seeing you, it makes me think I can. Eli's throat tightened, and James pulled her into a hug. You're not alone, he said. We've got you. Mia's confession was a turning point. Word spread, and more young people came forward, sharing their own struggles. Willow Creek was waking up, not just to Eli and James, but to a generation demanding change. The new church gained traction, but so did Sarah's group, which began planning a youth center to support kids like Mia. As winter approached, the town settled into an uneasy balance. The old church, now led by an interim pastor, leaned toward inclusion, while Carl's group drew a smaller, staunchly conservative crowd. Eli and James returned to Atlanta, their lives intertwined with Willow Creek in ways they hadn't expected. They weren't just a couple anymore, they were a symbol, a spark for something bigger. One evening, Clara called with an update. The youth center's happening, she said, her voice bright. Sarah's leading it, and your father's helping fund it. He's calling it a place for all God's kids. Eli smiled, imagining his father, once so rigid, building a space for acceptance. But challenges remained. Carl's group was vocal, spreading flyers that called the youth center a danger to family values. Eli worried about Mia and others caught in the crossfire. He and James decided to visit again, determined to support the kids who saw them as hope. As they drove into Willow Creek, the familiar church steeple came into view, no longer a symbol of fear but of possibility. Eli felt James's hand on his, a reminder of their strength. They'd faced the worst and come out stronger. Now, they'd fight for the next generation, no matter what it took. Snow dusted the streets of Willow Creek, turning the town into a quiet, glittering postcard. But beneath the calm, tension simmered. Eli and James arrived to find the youth center under fire. Flyers from Carl's group were plastered on telephone poles, decrying it as a haven for sin. Eli's stomach churned as he tore one down, its words sharp as knives. The youth center, a modest building on the edge of town, was still under construction, but Sarah had already started programs there. Mia and a dozen other teens gathered weekly, finding safety in shared stories. Eli and James joined them, sitting in a circle of folding chairs, listening as kids opened up about their fears and dreams. Mia, now more confident, spoke of wanting to be a writer, to tell stories that could change hearts like Eli's had. "Your wedding," she told Eli, her eyes bright. "It made me believe I could be myself someday." Eli smiled, but the weight of her words pressed on him. He and James weren't just fighting for themselves anymore, they were carrying the hopes of kids who'd never had a voice. John was there too, hammering nails into drywall or bringing coffee for volunteers. His transformation still stunned Eli. The man who'd once pushed conversion therapy was now a quiet advocate, his actions speaking louder than words. But Carl's group was relentless, petitioning the town council to block the center's funding. "They're saying it's against community standards," Clara told Eli one night, her voice tight. "They're planning a protest." The protest came on a frigid Saturday, a small but loud group outside the center, holding signs with Bible verses and angry slogans. Eli and James stood with Sarah and the teens, their breath visible in the cold air. John was there too, his face set in determination. "They don't get to win," he said, his voice low but fierce. Sarah took the megaphone, her voice steady despite the hecklers. "This center is for every kid who feels alone," she said. "It's for love, not hate." Some protesters jeered, but others lowered their signs, their faces softening. Eli saw Mr. Hargrove among them, his expression conflicted. He didn't join the chants, just stood silently, watching. Then Mia stepped forward, her small frame trembling but resolute. "I'm gay," she said into the megaphone, her voice cracking but clear. "And I'm not ashamed. This place saved me." The crowd stilled, her courage a quiet thunder. Eli felt tears prick his eyes as James squeezed his hand. John stepped forward, putting an arm around Mia. "She's one of ours," he said, loud enough for all to hear. "And we protect our own." The protest fizzled, some leaving in anger, others in thought. Mr. Hargrove approached Eli afterward, his voice gruff. "I don't understand it all," he said. "But that girl, she's brave. Maybe I've got more to learn." Eli nodded, hope flickering again. The town council meeting was next, a make-or-break moment for the center's funding. Eli and James prepared with Sarah, crafting a presentation that leaned on stories, not arguments. They spoke of Mia, of other teens, of a town that could be a beacon of acceptance. John stood up too, his voice steady. "I was wrong once," he said to the council. "I hurt my son trying to change him. Don't make the same mistake with these kids." The vote was close, but the center won its funding, a narrow victory that felt like a miracle. Afterward, Clara hugged Eli tightly. "You're changing this town," she whispered. "You and James." Eli smiled, but he knew the fight wasn't over. Carl's group was already planning their next move, and some wounds ran too deep to heal quickly. Back in Atlanta, Eli and James settled into their routine, but Willow Creek pulled them back often. They mentored at the center, their bond with Mia and the others growing stronger. One night, Mia showed them a story she'd written, a fictional tale of a boy finding love in a small town. "It's about you," she said shyly. Eli read it, his heart swelling at her talent and courage. But trouble loomed. Carl's group filed a lawsuit against the center, claiming it violated community values. The news hit Eli hard, stirring old fears. What if we lose it? He asked James, his voice breaking. James pulled him close, his voice calm. Then we build another. We don't stop. Eli. Not for them. Not for anyone. As spring approached, the lawsuit loomed, a dark cloud over the center's progress. Eli and James prepared to return, ready to fight alongside Sarah, John, and the kids. Willow Creek was changing, but every step forward came with resistance. Eli looked at James, his anchor, and felt a quiet resolve. They'd face this together, just as they always had. For love, for hope, and for a town that was learning to be better. Spring brought new life to Willow Creek, but the lawsuit cast a shadow over the youth center. Eli and James returned to find the town polarized, lawns sprouting signs for and against the center. The case was set for a hearing in Macon, a nearby city, and the stakes felt higher than ever. The center had become a haven, its walls covered in artwork from teens like Mia, who'd found her voice there. Eli and James spent their days mentoring, helping with homework, and listening to stories of struggle and hope. But the lawsuit threatened to undo it all. Carl's group, backed by a conservative legal fund, argued the center promoted immoral behavior and misused public funds. Eli read their filings, his anger flaring at the lies woven into legal jargon. Sarah organized a rally before the hearing, a show of support for the center. The park filled with familiar faces: Clara, John, Mr. Hargrove, and dozens of teens and parents. Even Pastor Reynolds, who'd stayed quiet since stepping down, showed up, his presence a quiet endorsement. Eli felt a surge of gratitude, but fear lingered. What if the court sided with Carl? John pulled Eli aside before the rally. "I'm testifying," he said, his voice steady but heavy. "I need to tell them what I've learned, what you've taught me." Eli's throat tightened. His father, once his greatest critic, was now his fiercest ally. "Just be you, Dad," Eli said. "That's enough." The rally was electric, with Mia reading a poem she'd written about finding herself in the center's safe walls. Her words drew tears and cheers, a reminder of what was at stake. James spoke too, his voice calm but powerful. "This isn't about politics," he said. "It's about kids who need a place to belong. Let's give them that." The hearing in Macon was stark, the courtroom cold and formal. Eli and James sat in the front row, hands clasped, as lawyers argued. Carl's side leaned on scripture and tradition, painting the center as a threat. Sarah's team, bolstered by a pro bono lawyer from Atlanta, countered with data studies showing how safe spaces reduced teen suicide and fostered community. John took the stand, his broad shoulders squared but his eyes soft. "I used to think I had to fix my son," he said, his voice echoing in the quiet room. "I sent him to a place that promised to change him. But it was me who needed changing. This center, it's saving kids like I couldn't save Eli back then." He looked at Eli, his voice breaking. "I'm proud of who he is." The judge, a stern woman with sharp eyes, listened intently. Eli felt a flicker of hope, but knew the decision could go either way. As they left the courtroom, James whispered, "We did all we could. Now we wait." Back in Willow Creek, the wait was agonizing. Eli and James threw themselves into the center, helping with a mural project to keep the kids' spirits up. Mia painted a rainbow, bold and unapologetic, and Eli smiled at her courage. But late at night, doubts crept in. What if we lose? He asked James, lying in bed. James kissed his forehead. Then we keep fighting. For Mia. For all of them. The ruling came 2 weeks later. A crisp email from Sarah. Eli's hands shook as he opened it. "We won," he read aloud, his voice cracking. The judge had ruled the center's funding was legal. Its purpose aligned with public good. Carl's group could appeal. But for now, the center was safe. Willow Creek erupted in celebration. The youth center hosted a party, with music and laughter spilling into the street. John hugged Eli tightly, his voice thick. "You made this happen," he said. Eli shook his head. "We all did." But the victory wasn't total. Carl's group vowed to appeal, and some townsfolk still kept their distance. Eli and James knew the fight would continue, but something had shifted. The center was a beacon now, drawing kids from neighboring towns, its impact rippling outward. As summer approached, Eli and James planned a trip to visit other centers, hoping to share what they'd learned. Mia joined them, her confidence growing, her stories now published in a local paper. John and Clara became fixtures at the center, their home a hub for teens needing a meal or a kind word. One evening, as Eli and James sat on their Atlanta balcony, Eli turned to his husband. "I never thought we'd get here," he said, his voice soft. James smiled, his eyes warm. "We're not done yet, but we're building something real." Eli nodded, feeling the truth of it. They'd faced the worst and come out stronger, not just for themselves, but for a town learning to love better. Summer sun bathed Willow Creek in golden light, but the youth center was the true heart of the town's transformation. Eli and James stood outside, watching kids paint a new mural, a vibrant tapestry of faces, hands, and rainbows. Mia, now a confident 17-year-old, led the project, her laughter echoing as she guided younger teens. The center had become a sanctuary, its doors open to anyone seeking belonging. The lawsuit's victory had galvanized Willow Creek, but Carl's group hadn't backed down. Their appeal was pending, a shadow over the center's future. Yet Eli felt a quiet strength. The town wasn't perfect, but it was changing because of Mia, Sarah, his parents, and countless others who'd chosen love over fear. John had become a pillar at the center, organizing fundraisers and mentoring kids. His faith, once rigid, now embraced questions, inspired by Eli's courage. Clara, too, had found her voice, leading a book club for parents learning to support their LGBTQ kids. Even Mr. Hargrove stopped by occasionally, his gruff demeanor softening as he helped with repairs. One afternoon, Eli and James met with Sarah to plan an expansion counseling wing for teens struggling with identity. "We're getting calls from all over Georgia," Sarah said, her eyes bright. "Kids need this. Parents need this." Eli felt a swell of pride. Their fight had sparked something bigger than they'd imagined. But the appeal loomed. Carl's group, backed by a national organization, pushed harder, framing the center as a cultural battleground. Eli and James prepared for another hearing, this time in Atlanta, where the stakes felt even higher. They gathered letters from teens, parents, and even Pastor Reynolds, who'd written a quiet but powerful endorsement of the center's mission. The hearing was tense, the courtroom packed with supporters and opponents. Eli testified, his voice steady as he spoke of the center's impact. "This isn't about changing kids," he said. "It's about giving them a place to be themselves, to live." James followed, his words sharp and clear. "Love isn't a threat. Fear is." John took the stand last, his presence commanding. "I tried to fix my son," he said, his voice raw. "I thought I was saving him, but he saved me, showed me what love really means. This center is that love in action." The room was silent, his words a bridge between past and future. The judge's ruling came swiftly. The appeal was denied. The center was safe, its funding secure. Cheers erupted as Eli and James embraced. tears streaming down their faces. John joined them, his hug fierce and unreserved. "We did it," he whispered, and Eli nodded, feeling the weight of years lift. Back in Willow Creek, the town celebrated with a festival at the center. Music filled the air, and kids danced under string lights, their joy infectious. Mia read a new story, one of a town learning to heal, and the crowd gave her a standing ovation. Mr. Hargrove, now a reluctant ally, clapped too, his smile small but genuine. As the festival wound down, Eli and James stood by the mural, watching the sunset. "This is home now," Eli said, his voice soft. James nodded, his hand in Eli's. "Not just for us. For all of them." They looked at the kids, at John and Clara laughing with Sarah, at a town stitching itself back together. The fight wasn't over. There would always be challenges, voices like Carl's refusing to bend. But Eli and James had built something enduring, a legacy of love, not just for themselves, but for every kid who'd ever felt broken. They'd faced a father's rejection, a town's judgment, and their own fears, and they'd come out stronger. 1 year later, at the center's anniversary, Eli and James returned for a special event, Mia's first published book, a collection of stories inspired by Willow Creek. As she signed copies, she hugged Eli tightly. "You gave me this," she said. Eli shook his head. "You did this, Mia. We just opened the door." That night, John raised a glass at a small family dinner, his eyes on Eli and James. "To love," he said, his voice steady, "and to never giving up." The room echoed his toast, a promise carried forward. Eli looked at James, his heart full, knowing they'd not only found each other, but helped a town find its soul.